What happens when one of the world's most beloved late-night hosts sits down with royalty, only to have the entire interview spiral into chaos? In just 36 seconds, a single comment would turn a friendly conversation into television history's most shocking meltdown, ending with security escorting a prince off the stage. Jimmy Kimmel had interviewed thousands of guests over his career: presidents, movie stars, musicians, athletes, but nothing could prepare him for what was about to unfold on this particular evening. The audience was buzzing with excitement as Prince Harry walked onto the stage, waving to the crowd with that familiar smile everyone had seen in magazines and news coverage around the world. The applause was deafening. This was supposed to be a light, fun conversation. Easy jokes, some laughs, maybe a heartwarming story or two about his family. Standard late-night fare. Jimmy stood up from behind his desk, shaking Harry's hand warmly. "Welcome, welcome. Great to have you here." The crowd continued cheering as Harry took his seat on the couch, adjusting his jacket and settling in. Jimmy returned to his chair, shuffling his note cards with that signature grin. "So, Prince Harry, thanks so much for being here. I know you've got a lot going on." Harry nodded, his expression pleasant enough. "Thanks for having me, Jimmy." The first few minutes went smoothly. Jimmy asked about California, about adjusting to life in America, about the weather. Harry gave polite answers. Nothing too deep, nothing controversial. The audience laughed at the appropriate moments. Everything seemed perfectly normal. But then Jimmy, doing what talk show hosts do, tried to dig a little deeper, get something more interesting, something with a bit more flavor for his viewers. "So, you've been pretty outspoken about wanting privacy for your family," Jimmy said, leaning forward slightly. "But you've also done interviews, documentaries, written a book. How do you balance that?" "I'm genuinely curious because it seems like a tricky line to walk." It was a fair question. Reasonable. The kind of thing any journalist might ask. But Harry's face changed. The smile disappeared. His jaw tightened. He stared at Jimmy for a long moment, and the energy in the studio shifted instantly. You could feel it. The audience sensed it too. The laughter died down. People shifted in their seats. "That's a pretty simplistic way of looking at it, Jimmy," Harry said, his voice cool. "I don't think you understand what it's like to have your entire life dissected by the media since birth." Jimmy blinked, surprised by the edge in Harry's tone. "No, I don't. You're absolutely right. I was just asking because you want a soundbite," Harry interrupted. "You want me to say something you can clip and put online. That's what this is really about, isn't it?" The audience went completely silent. Jimmy's smile faltered. He glanced at his producers off stage, then back at Harry. "I mean, we're doing an interview, so yeah, we're having a conversation. But I didn't mean any offense." "Right. A conversation," Harry said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Where you get to ask invasive questions, and I'm supposed to smile and play along because that's how this works." Jimmy sat back in his chair, trying to regain control of the situation. This was his show. He'd handled difficult guests before. He knew how to diffuse tension with humor. "Hey, listen, if the question bothered you, we can talk about something else." "No problem at all." "Want to tell us about your favorite taco spot in LA? I'm always looking for recommendations." It was a peace offering, a way out, a chance to reset and move forward. But Harry wasn't taking it. "You think this is funny?" Harry said, his voice rising slightly. "You think you can just joke your way out of being disrespectful?" Jimmy's expression shifted from friendly to confused. "I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I'm really not. I asked a question that a lot of people have wondered about. If it came across wrong, I apologize." "A lot of people," Harry repeated, shaking his head. "You mean a lot of people who consume garbage tabloid journalism and think they know everything about my life? Those people?" The audience was frozen. Some people looked at each other, unsure of what they were witnessing. Was this part of the show? Some kind of bit? But Jimmy's face made it clear this was very real. He wasn't acting. He looked genuinely uncomfortable. I think we should probably take a quick break, Jimmy said, looking toward the cameras. No, Harry said sharply. We're not taking a break. I'm not done. Jimmy turned back to Harry, his expression hardening slightly. He was a professional, but he also wasn't going to be pushed around on his own show. Okay, what would you like to say? I'd like to say that people like you are part of the problem, Harry continued, leaning forward now, pointing his finger at Jimmy. You sit here in your comfortable little studio, making millions of dollars, and you think you can judge how I live my life. You think you can question my choices. I wasn't judging, Jimmy said firmly. I asked a question. That's literally my job. You agreed to come on the show knowing we'd have a conversation. A conversation implies mutual respect, Harry shot back, which clearly isn't happening here. Jimmy took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. The audience could see him actively working to keep his composure. I have nothing but respect for you. I invited you here because I thought it would be interesting and fun. But if you feel disrespected, then maybe we should just end the interview now. Maybe we should, Harry said, crossing his arms. There was a pause. An awkward, terrible pause where nobody knew what to do. Jimmy looked at his producers again. They were signaling something, probably telling him to go to commercial. But before he could say anything, Harry started up again. You know what your problem is, Jimmy, Harry said, his voice loud enough now that it echoed through the studio. You're fake. This whole thing is fake. You pretend to care about your guests, but really, you just want ratings. You want clicks. You want to make people laugh at other people's expense. That's not true, Jimmy said, his voice steady, but you could hear the frustration creeping in. I've been doing this show for 20 years. I care about every person who sits on that couch. 20 years of what? Mediocrity? Harry said, and the audience gasped. Actually gasped out loud. This had crossed a line. Whatever weirdness had been happening before, this was now a direct attack. Jimmy's face flushed red. He wasn't smiling anymore. Okay, you need to stop right there. Or what? Harry challenged. You'll have me thrown out? Go ahead. Show everyone what kind of person you really are. What kind of person I am? Jimmy's voice rose now too. He stood up from his chair. You come on my show. You insult me. You insult my work. You insult my audience. And I'm the bad guy? Are you serious right now? Harry stood up too. They were both standing now, facing each other across the desk. The audience didn't know whether to watch or look away. This was beyond uncomfortable. This was a full-blown confrontation on live television. I'm dead serious, Harry said. You're a puppet, Jimmy. A corporate puppet who does what he's told and asks what he's given on a card. Jimmy pointed at Harry, his hand shaking slightly with anger. You don't know anything about me. You come into my house, disrespect me, disrespect these people who came here to have a good time, and you act like you're better than everyone, like you're owed something. I am owed respect, Harry said, something you clearly don't understand how to give. I gave you respect the moment you walked through that door, Jimmy shouted. The audience had never seen him like this. Jimmy? Kimmel didn't shout. He joked. He laughed. He was the fun guy. But right now, he was furious. I welcomed you. I was excited to talk to you. And you've done nothing but attack me since you sat down. Because your questions were insulting, Harry yelled back. My questions were normal. They were things anyone would ask. You're the one who turned this into whatever this is. Jimmy gestured wildly at the space between them. Security guards were moving toward the stage now. The producers had clearly called them. This needed to end before it got even worse. But Harry saw them coming, and it only seemed to fuel his anger. Of course you're calling security, Harry said with a bitter laugh. Can't handle a real conversation, so you have me removed. Very brave, Jimmy. Very brave. This isn't a conversation anymore, Jimmy said, his voice quieter now, but still firm. This is you having some kind of meltdown on my show. And yeah, I'm going to ask you to leave, because you're being hostile. and inappropriate. Inappropriate? Harry's voice went up an octave. You want to talk about inappropriate? How about the thousands of jokes you've made at other people's expense over the years? How about all the times you've mocked people, made fun of them, turned their lives into punchlines? That's comedy, Jimmy said. That's what a late night show is. If you don't like it, you shouldn't have agreed to come on. I came on because I thought you might actually be different, Harry said, but you're just like all the rest. A vulture, feeding off other people's stories for your own gain. The security guards reached the stage. Two large men in suits, moving calmly but purposefully toward Harry. Jimmy looked at them and nodded. He'd had enough. Gentlemen, please escort our guest out of the building, Jimmy said, his voice cold and professional. Harry laughed again, that same bitter laugh. Unbelievable. This is unbelievable. What's unbelievable is your behavior, Jimmy said. I've interviewed some difficult people in my time, but you take the cake. You're rude, you're entitled, and frankly, you're embarrassing yourself. I'm embarrassing myself? Harry looked around at the audience, spreading his arms wide. You're all watching this, right? You see what's happening here? He asks invasive questions. I defend myself, and I'm the problem. Nobody in the audience responded. They just stared. Some looked sympathetic to Jimmy. Others looked shocked by the whole thing, but nobody was on Harry's side. You could tell by their faces. One of the security guards gently touched Harry's arm. Sir, we need you to come with us. Harry yanked his arm away. Don't touch me. Sir, please, the guard said calmly. Let's not make this harder than it needs to be. Jimmy walked around his desk now, standing between Harry and the audience. You need to go. Now. Fine, Harry said, straightening his jacket. I'll go. But everyone watching needs to know what a fraud you are, Jimmy. What a complete and total fraud. And everyone watching can see exactly what you are too, Jimmy replied. Someone who can't handle a simple question without throwing a tantrum. Someone who thinks being royal means you can treat people however you want. Harry's face went bright red. How dare you? How dare I? Jimmy's voice was incredulous. You've been insulting me for the last 10 minutes. You called me mediocre. You called me fake. You called me a puppet. And I'm the one who's out of line? You don't get it, Harry said, shaking his head. You don't get it at all. Then explain it to me, Jimmy said, opening his hands. Explain what I'm missing. Because from where I'm standing, you came on my show looking for a fight. And now you're upset that you're being asked to leave? Harry opened his mouth to respond, but one of the security guards stepped between them. Sir, we really need to go now. Get your hands off me, Harry shouted, even though the guard wasn't actually touching him. Nobody's touching you, the guard said patiently. But you do need to leave the premises. Please walk with us. The second guard moved to Harry's other side. They weren't grabbing him, weren't forcing him, but their presence made it clear this wasn't optional anymore. Harry looked at Jimmy one more time, his eyes full of anger. This isn't over, Harry said. Yeah, it is, Jimmy replied. It's very over. Goodbye. The guards began walking Harry toward the stage exit. He was moving with them, but kept turning back to look at Jimmy, at the audience, like he wanted to say more, like he couldn't believe this was actually happening. You'll regret this, Harry called out as they reached the curtain. You'll regret treating me this way. Jimmy didn't respond. He just stood there, watching Harry disappear backstage with the security guards. The audience remained silent, completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop in that studio. Everyone was processing what they'd just witnessed. After a long moment, Jimmy turned back to face the crowd. His face was still flushed, his hands still shaking slightly. He walked back to his desk, gripped the edge of it, and took a deep breath. Well, he finally said, his voice a bit shaky. That was something. A few nervous laughs rippled through the audience. but mostly people just stared, still in shock. Jimmy continued, running a hand through his hair. I honestly don't know what just happened. We invited someone on the show to have a nice conversation, and it turned into that. I'm sorry you all had to see it. It's not your fault, someone from the audience shouted. Others murmured in agreement. Jimmy gave a small, sad smile. I appreciate that. I really do. But man, that was uncomfortable. He sat down in his chair, his usual energy completely drained. This wasn't the fun, jokey Jimmy everyone knew. This was a guy who'd just been attacked on his own show and was trying to make sense of it. I've been doing this job for a long time, he said quietly, and I've never had an interview go like that. I asked a question that I thought was fair. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe I worded it wrong. But the response was so out of proportion to anything I said. The audience was listening intently. They could see this was genuine. Jimmy wasn't performing anymore. He was just talking. When you invite someone on your show, you want them to feel comfortable, he continued. You want to have a good conversation. Make people laugh. Maybe learn something. That's all I was trying to do. I swear. More supportive murmurs from the crowd. The thing is, Jimmy said, looking directly at the camera now, everyone who comes on this show gets asked questions. That's the deal. Sometimes they're silly questions. Sometimes they're more serious. But they're always asked with respect. Always. And if someone doesn't want to answer something, they can just say so. We move on. It's not a big deal. He paused, collecting his thoughts. But what you just saw was someone who came in with an agenda. Who wanted to be offended? Who was looking for a reason to explode? And I don't understand why. I really don't. A stagehand brought Jimmy a glass of water. He took it gratefully, drinking half of it in one go. My team is telling me we should probably go to commercial, Jimmy said, glancing at his notes, which were now scattered across his desk from when he'd stood up. But I just want to say one more thing. The studio was so quiet you could hear the camera equipment humming. To everyone here and everyone watching at home, thank you for sticking with us through that incredibly awkward situation. I'm sorry our guest behaved that way. You deserved better. You came here to have fun, and instead, you got a front row seat to whatever that was. He shook his head, still looking bewildered. I've always tried to be fair to my guests. Always. Even when I disagree with them, even when I make jokes about them, it's never mean-spirited. It's never personal. But tonight, someone made it very personal. And honestly, it hurt. You could see the emotion in Jimmy's eyes. This had genuinely affected him. But you know what? We're going to take a break. I'm going to pull myself together, and we're going to come back and finish this show the right way. Because that's what we do. We don't let one person's bad behavior ruin the night for everyone else. The audience burst into applause. Real, supportive applause. People were standing up, cheering for Jimmy, showing him that they were on his side, that they recognized what had happened wasn't his fault. Jimmy stood up again, waving to the crowd. Thank you. Seriously. Thank you. All right. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we've got a great musical performance lined up, and I promise it'll be a lot more enjoyable than what you just witnessed. Stay with us. The cameras cut, and Jimmy immediately slumped back into his chair. The audience could see him talking animatedly with his producers, who'd rushed onto the stage. He was gesturing, explaining, clearly still upset about what had transpired. But there was also relief on his face. Relief that it was over, that the confrontation had ended. Backstage, Harry was being escorted through the hallways by security. Staff members stepped aside as they passed, everyone staring but nobody saying anything. Harry's face was still red, his fists clenched at his sides. He kept muttering under his breath, words the guards couldn't quite make out. "This way, sir," one of them said, guiding him toward the exit. "I know the way," Harry snapped. They reached the door leading to the parking lot. The guard opened it, and the cool night air rushed in. Harry stopped in the doorway, turning back to look down the hallway toward the studio. You could hear the muffled sound of the audience, still applauding Jimmy. "Unbelievable," Harry said one more time. "Have a good night, sir," the guard said politely, even though there was nothing polite about how Harry was leaving. Harry walked through the door without another word. It closed behind him with a heavy click, and the guards stood there for a moment, looking at each other. "Well, that was something," one of them said. "Weirdest removal I've ever done," the other replied. "Guy just lost it over nothing." Back in the studio, the commercial break was ending. Jimmy had straightened his tie, fixed his hair, and was putting on his professional face again. But everyone in that room knew something had fundamentally shifted. They'd all witnessed something they'd never forget. The cameras came back on. Jimmy smiled at the audience, but it wasn't his usual smile. It was the smile of someone who'd been through something difficult and was doing his best to move forward. "Welcome back," he said. "For those of you just joining us, you missed quite a show. And by quite a show, I mean quite a disaster." The audience laughed, grateful for the tension break. "But that's live television for you," Jimmy continued. "You never know what's going to happen. Sometimes you get a great interview. Sometimes you get someone throwing a fit like a toddler who didn't get the right color sippy cup." More laughter. Jimmy was finding his footing again, using humor to process what had happened. "Anyway, we've got a fantastic performance coming up, and I promise nobody's going to yell at me during it. At least I hope not." He shuffled through his cards, found the right one, and launched into his introduction for the musical guest. The show went on, because that's what shows do. They go on, no matter what chaos erupts in the middle. In the dressing room area, staff were already cleaning up, removing any trace that Harry had been there. His water bottle, the guest chair he'd sat in while waiting. Everything was being cleared away like he'd never existed. One production, assistant shook her head as she worked. "Can you believe that?" she said to her colleague. "Nope," he replied. "Been working here for 8 years. Never seen anything like it." "Jimmy didn't deserve that," she said. "He's the nicest guy." "Yeah, he is. Makes it even worse that someone would treat him that way." They finished cleaning and moved on to prep for the next day's show. Because in television, there's always a next day. Always another show to produce. Always more guests to book. But everyone who was in that studio would remember this night. Would remember the moment a prince walked onto a talk show and lost his mind over a simple question. Would remember watching Jimmy Kimmel, usually so calm and funny, standing up and defending himself. Would remember the security guards escorting someone out while the audience sat in stunned silence. The musical performance ended. Jimmy thanked the band, thanked the audience, thanked everyone for watching. He made a few more jokes, lighter ones now, trying to end the show on a positive note. But you could still see it in his eyes. The hurt, the confusion, the frustration of having tried to do his job and being attacked for it. "That's our show," he finally said as the closing music began. "Thanks for watching, everyone. And remember, not all interviews go well, but at least they're entertaining." The audience laughed and applauded. The cameras pulled back. The lights came up. And just like that, it was over. But the moment itself, that explosive 36 seconds that started everything, would live forever. Not because it was planned or scripted or designed for maximum drama, but because it was real, raw, uncomfortable, a glimpse behind the curtain at what happens when someone's facade cracks completely. Jimmy stayed on stage for a while after the cameras stopped rolling, talking to audience members who came up to express their support. He shook hands, took selfies, thanked people for being understanding. Every person who approached him said some version of the same thing. "That wasn't your fault. You handled it well. He was out of line." And Jimmy appreciated it. really appreciated it. Because when you're in the moment, when someone's yelling at you and attacking your character, it's hard to know if you're responding correctly. Hard to know if you're the one who's wrong. But the support of the audience, of his staff, of everyone who'd witnessed it, that told him he'd done the right thing. Eventually, the studio emptied. The crew finished packing up. The lights dimmed. Jimmy sat alone at his desk for a moment, in the quiet, processing everything that had happened. His producer came over, putting a hand on his shoulder. "You okay?" Jimmy nodded. Yeah, I'm okay. Just trying to figure out what I did wrong." "You didn't do anything wrong," the producer said firmly. "That guy came in looking for a fight. You gave him a platform, he abused it, and you handled it exactly right." "It felt awful," Jimmy admitted. "I'm sure it did. But you stood up for yourself. You didn't let him walk all over you. That matters." Jimmy stood up, grabbing his jacket from the back of his chair. "Well, tomorrow's another show." "Tomorrow's another show," the producer agreed. They walked out together, leaving the empty studio behind. Outside, the Los Angeles night was cool and clear. People were getting into their cars, heading home, already texting friends about what they'd just witnessed. And somewhere out there, Harry was probably still angry, still convinced he'd been wronged, still believing his outburst was justified. But that didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that Jimmy had defended himself, had maintained his dignity, and had shown everyone watching that there are limits to what anyone should tolerate, even from royalty. The story would be everywhere by morning. Clips would circulate online. People would debate who was right and who was wrong. Think pieces would be written. Other talk show hosts would make jokes about it. It would become part of television history. But for Jimmy, walking to his car in the parking lot, it was just another night where he'd done his best and hoped it was good enough. Another night where he'd tried to entertain people and ended up in an impossible situation. Another night in a long career, full of unpredictable moments. He got in his car, started the engine, and sat there for a moment before driving away. In the quiet of the vehicle, he could finally let his guard down completely. Could acknowledge how much that had rattled him, how personal those attacks had felt, how difficult it had been to stand there and be insulted in front of hundreds of people. But he'd done it. He'd gotten through it. And tomorrow, he'd do it again. Because that's what you do when you're Jimmy Kimmel. You show up, you do your job, and you handle whatever gets thrown at you with as much grace as possible. Even when grace is the last thing you're being shown in return.